All right, so welcome everyone. My name is Theo Fort-Stiegler. I'm here with Nexus for Change. I also get to represent the Bowling Green State University graduate programs in organization development and change. I'm an alum of the master's and now a doctoral student. Very honored on this Juneteenth to have Rick Fenwick here, who is actually an instructor at Bowling Green State University, and so has been doing some teaching. And Rick, I'll let you tell a little bit of your story in terms of how you came to this work and this topic today, but I think it's probably a very timely topic. So I'm glad that we're recording what you're sharing to be able to share it beyond this particular session today, talking about language techniques for conflict resolution. Juneteenth maybe is the reason that this is not a packed house to the gills here on Zoom today, considering that is when we consider the fact that it took almost 3 years in Galveston, Texas, for people to be informed about that slavery had already officially ended in 1862. On June 19 of 1865 is when folks in Galveston were finally informed that, hey, this is actually now a rule for our nation, that slavery is illegal. So with that as a bit of context, as well as sort of the situation that we find ourselves in, where I think a lot of times we seem to be more either or and more divisive in many of our conversations in today's day and time. I welcome you, Rick, to share a little bit about yourself and how you got to this work, and then give us some language techniques for conflict resolution.
Okay, thanks, Teo. Well, I might say that I think in my background, what was really fortunate for me was that I had the opportunity to work in OD first, and then I was getting educated while I was doing that. So the advantage is it put me in a position to really apply everything I was learning as I learned it. And when I started, I was at a plant location in the automotive industry. And so what the leaders wanted to do was they put me in charge of all the teams in the plant. So I was, at that point in time, I don't know, I had something like 30, 40 teams. And so I was in and out of mostly teams that were in conflict, helping them with conflict. And so what I was able to do, I was able to quickly learn what works and what doesn't work, and what type of techniques I needed. And then from the plant, I moved up to doing that for the entire site, where I had multiple plants. And so basically I was doing the same thing, only with higher levels and more people. And then eventually I went corporate with that. So I was doing it all over the country, and then became an external where I could just do it anywhere. Also, within the training, I was trained as a mediator here in the state of Michigan, and so I was able to incorporate a lot of the techniques into mediation, as well as techniques I learned in mediation. So I'll give you a few examples of techniques that I've used consistently that were effective and effective across context. I'll give you an example of one story of the kind of conflicts I'd get sent into. There was this one plant that on the third shift had a machine area, and it had a reputation for having the toughest guys in the plant kind of migrated to third shift in this machine area. And so a lot of people didn't like to go in there and do work and have to interact with them. And they had been set up in 3 teams. And over time, somehow, I guess probably through the lack of management and oversight, these 3 teams got allowed to merge into one giant dysfunctional team. And so the top leaders, both union and management, they were concerned about this because it wasn't good for either side. So they called me in. They said, Rick, we want you to go into third shift into this giant team, and we want you to break it up and put it back into teams of the right size. And so I thanked them for that assignment. And I thought, this is going to be a good one. And so here I am in the middle of the night, walking into this plant. And I'm wondering, I'm actually, to be honest with you, I'm hoping that I'll physically get out alive. And I go into this room, and sure enough, there's 50 people in there. And when I get in there, the first things I like to do is kind of observe and just see if I can pick up on, hey, what's the mood or the tone of the room? And I could tell they were not happy. They were not in a good mood, and they were definitely not happy to see me. So I get up in front of the group, and I didn't have a plan. I didn't know how to go about doing this. I was pretty new at the job. And I thought, well, I'm just going to stand here in front of them for a minute and just check it out. And while I'm standing there, somebody raised their hand. So right away, I go, yeah, what do you want to say? And he says, well, he said, and the guy stood up, it's like he's going to make a formal speech. And he was angry. I mean, it was pretty obvious. He said, I heard that you came in here to break this team up. So, I thought, well, that's why I'm here. So I'm going to be straightforward. And I looked at him, I said, you're absolutely right. I said, that's why I'm here. And before I could say another word, he said, well, I just want you to know right now, I quit. And he walks out because this being on his team was optional. And when he said that, more of them started saying that. And when they got done, I had the size of one team left in the room. Oh, yeah, it was beautiful. And I took out a piece of paper from my notebook and I handed it around. I told him, I said, sign this piece of paper. I said, by the power invested in me, I now declare you the official team on third shift. And the whole thing took 10 minutes. I was able to walk out of the plant. Next day, I go back to the leaders. I hand them that sheet and I said, here's your team. So what I learned, my lesson from that was don't get in a hurry about talking when you get up in front of a team. Give it some space. And I'll show you here shortly how that ties into some of this. All right, did my PowerPoint show up? Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, the techniques I want to cover, they can be used in different contexts. And that's one of the things I like. You can apply them at work, with family. You can even apply them with friends. I mean, these techniques are pretty universal. As I watch this world conflict going on, some of these techniques are actually being applied worldwide, and some could be. So the first thing I want to start off with, I want to do this short breathing technique that comes from a meditation teacher. His name's David G. And I'll show you, I gave you a hint on how it's relevant with my story, but I'll show you coming up how it ties into a technique. And what this technique does, it's really short, it's non-threatening. That's one of the things I like about it. And it does produce a calming effect, and it brings people into the moment. And so what we're going to do, and I'll count it through, we're just going to take a breath in to the count of 4, hold it to the count of 4. We'll breathe out to the count of 4 and then hold it to the count of 4. And it can be helpful. Just count along with me. So we'll take a breath in, we'll breathe out, and then let's count together. So take a breath in, breathe out. Now in, 2, 3, 4. Hold it. 2, 3, 4. Out. 2, 3, 4. Hold it. 2, 3, 4. Now breathe normal. That took 16 seconds. There was a 16 seconds of box breathing. And when you do that, and if you're counting along, you're in the present moment. In other words, you're not in the future, you're not in the past, you're in the here and now. And that can be helpful in conflict. And I'll be showing you coming up where we can apply that technique. All right, the first technique I want to talk about, and I'll give you a source for it. If I learned this from Tad James and Wyatt Woodsmall. Actually took a workshop with them, and I put their reference down here. They actually wrote a book in 1988, and they put this model in the book. It's called Timeline Therapy. But the model is a simple model, but very powerful. And I'll show you how I use it. But before I show you how to use this, let's set it up. So I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to type an answer into the chat. A car is an example of what? And just type it into the chat. Okay.
And send it?
Yeah. Type it in the chat so I can see it. And then I'll work with your data. Okay, someone said transportation here. Thank you. Yeah, a car is an example of transportation, right? You get in it, you go somewhere. So let me ask you again, transportation. Transportation is an example of what? In other words, what's going on with transportation? Okay, great. The word I'm hunting there, Gilmore, thank you. It's movement. In other words, it's just an example of moving people from point A to point B. So let's go one more. Movement is an example of what? I'm getting up there pretty high, yeah. Okay, I've got an ability, I've got change. We're referring to people, so it could be existence. All right, so there's an existence, so we're moving. So now we've got a car as an example of transportation, of movement, and existence. Now, give me an example of a car. What's an example of a car? Yeah, there we go. I'm getting them Hondas, Porsche, fancy cars too, right? Okay, and all of these are good. A Pinto, well, that's an old one. That's going back a lot of years. Now, give me an example. See, someone, Jennifer said Jeep. Give me an example of a Jeep. Okay, WW2, World War II Jeep. Rubicon, that's an example. That's a model. Okay, give me an example of a Rubicon. All right. Okay, leather seats, tinted windows. That's very good. We could have went color, right? Because they come in different colors. All right, so I think you've got the idea. So here's the model. Only I picked a Chevy because that's what comes to my mind first. So if you look at this, levels of abstraction, we started with a car and we went up. Each level is a higher level of abstraction. Then we took cars, specific cars like Chevy or a Jeep. We worked the Jeep. And we went, as we go down, we're getting more specific. So I went Chevy, Equinox, electric. Earlier we went Jeep, Rubicon, leather seats, tinted windows. But as you go down, you're getting more detail. So each level represents a level of detail or a level of abstraction. When people talk, they are talking at some level on this chart. And you have to listen to what level they're at. And here's the technique. If they're in conflict, talking at a particular level, and you move up a level of abstraction, you can find an agreement. Now, if you don't get agreement on the next level up, go up another one. You should get an agreement. Now, it's very unusual to move all the way up and not get an agreement. I was talking earlier before we started. We actually have an example right now today between Iran and Israel in the fact that we cannot find a level of agreement on this chart with them because they're playing the genocide card. And so, which means they're saying, hey, you don't have the right to exist. And it's kind of hard to go higher in abstraction than that. So what do you have? You have war as a result. They're warring it out. And so I can only assume at one point in time, President Trump had found some type of common ground to get him to the table, because he had him at the table, but it broke down after what, 60 days, I think. But let's go back to, say if I took union and management in a plant and they're arguing over a safety item and how it's being done out in the plant. And I can see by observing them, they're kind of mad about it. In other words, they're tired of arguing with each other. So they're put out with each other. Their internal state's not good. It's not the type of state I want them in to work with them to try to get an agreement. So what I want to do is move up in abstraction and find where they can agree. So I would look at them and say, do you agree we do want this plant to operate safely? And of course, both sides would agree to that. They would in every single plant in the United States. So now I can say, okay, look, we're in agreement that we want the plant to operate safely. And when we're in agreement, things feel different inside. So their internal state starts to change, and I can observe that because people show what their internal state is. They show it. There's indicators of it externally. So now that I can see, look, they're calming down, they're more in what I call normal state, then I can start to talk about the problem and then assist them in working out whatever the details are that they were hung up on. And then also, if they fall out of that agreement, I can go back to the level of abstraction where I said, wait a minute, you did agree we want to operate safely here. So, and I kind of covered what's on this chart here, but you continue to move up until you find agreement. I say in 99% of the time, you'll find it, and you'll find it within 1 to 2 levels up. One thing that I want to talk about is this superordinate goal that I found using this chart really was powerful. When I would work with a lot of plants and implementing change as an OD person, and I'm working with union and management, and my belief is that if I can get union and management to agree, then I can help them create change that is sustainable because they're in agreement. In other words, if union or management, if they both agree and there's no protest, then the change should be sustainable. And that's what I was looking for. So what I need to find is what I call a superordinate goal. And what would that be? Well, if we go back to this chart, it would simply be, what is it that both sides can agree to that's worthwhile and will bring them to the table? So now let's say if like one of the projects I worked a lot on was implementing teams. So one agreement that I could get as a superordinate goal from both union and management is growing the plant. In other words, they're saying, look, if we implement teams, we can grow the plant. Both management and union liked that as a superordinate goal. The union liked it. Why? Because there's potentially more jobs, more people that could be hired, become part of the union. Management liked it. Why? Because that meant they were being prosperous. They're generating more profitability. So that's the superordinate goal that held them together. So they could all come into the room under that superordinate goal. And then we could say that we're here because of this superordinate goal. And our mission or our task is to work out the details on how we're going to implement teams within this location. And then we could start to work with them. And then all I have to do as a mediator is, besides find the path, is keep them this superordinate goal in sight. And I could do that through caucus. So if anytime they start to fall out, we could caucus, bring them back in. Remember why we're here. This is worthwhile. And that gets people back on track, and then we work it out. So it's called levels of abstraction. Now, in their book, I believe what they actually called it was a hierarchy of ideas. But I like the levels of abstraction. To me, that's more of a direct answer. Okay, this next one, this next technique, I think, is the single most powerful technique, and I've used this just in family work and with friends. I mean, there's no end to the application to this technique, and I just want to honor the person that I learned this from, because he was a mentor of mine. That his name was Tom Pascoe, and he was just a special person. That he helped so many people within the auto industry, and he a couple of traits about him. He was always had a positive outlook, and he could put things in. He could always frame things into perspective, and he was the type of person that was very supportive, and so he provided the support a lot of people needed. Especially including me, he mentored a lot of people through their degrees. So when I first met him, I had just finished a master's degree, and he sat down, introduced himself, and he said, "You need a doctorate degree." And I said, "I do." And he goes, "Yeah." And he says, "I'm going to help you." And so he kind of mentored me through the process. He was a specialist in EAP, and I'll tell you one story on him is that we started consulting together after our auto days, and we had this job to implement EAP at a casino, and this casino was organized, so we had both union and management in the room, and everything was going well. So we were happy with the progress we were making. We took a break, and we were kind of hanging out with them on a break just to hear their talk, because a lot of times you can get insight that way. And it was kind of funny, they were venting that people in the public had a tendency to drop their elderly, handicapped relatives off at the casino early in the morning with a little bit of money, and then they would come and pick them up after work. And they said the problem was their money didn't last very long, and then they had, basically from their point of view, from HR's point of view, they kind of had a liability they had to manage for the rest of the day to make sure they were okay. So I thought that was kind of funny, but anyway, my friend Tom, later he got sick, and he was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, And so it was a serious diagnosis. And I remember one day I was at the office and it was kind of an off day for me. And in other words, I didn't have any direct delivery. And he called me and he was at home and he said, "Hey, Rick," said, "I'm having a bad day." He said, "Can you pick me up for treatment?" And I said, "Sure, I'll be there." So I went to get him, and when he came out, I could see, he wasn't doing well. So, I mean, I met him and helped him get into the car and all of that. And when I got to the hospital, I valeted and got a wheelchair and took him in for his treatment. And so anyway, he did his treatment. I'm waiting on him. And I knew his treatment could be rough, because sometimes they get sick, Anyway, so he comes out and he's in the wheelchair, and I'm pushing him down the hall towards the car. And I asked him, I said, "You gonna be okay?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "I'm okay." And then he had one of those Tom moments, and he just looked, I mean, he was able to put into perspective cognitively that here we were as kind of business partners, and he's pretty sick, and I'm pushing him out. And he just looked around at me and smiled, and he said, "I guess you're going to drop me off at the casino now." And so he never lost his sense of humor all the way to the end. But I'm going to introduce the technique to you the way he used to introduce it to people. And to do this, I'm going to show you a short video. This is a little under 2 minutes. And just watch it. And when we're done, I'm going to ask you what you saw here.
In a quiet restaurant, the wife sits, visibly upset. The husband enters, slightly out
Can
of
you hear
breath.
it?
Wife,
Okay.
you are late. Where have you been? I've been waiting and wondering if you forgot. If you really cared, you'd be on time. Husband, I do care. Traffic was bad. If you cared, you wouldn't have spent money on new clothes yesterday. That's wasteful. Wife, that has nothing to do with this. You always show up late and act like it's no big deal. Selfish. You're irresponsible. Husband, that's not fair. You find fault in everything I do. You never give me the benefit of the doubt. Wife, because you never take responsibility. You always blame traffic or work. It's like you think you're above accountability. Husband, you're being overly sensitive. Relax. If you were more understanding, we wouldn't have these problems. Wife, being late is not a little thing. It shows a lack of respect for me and our relationship. Husband, I said I was sorry. What more do you want? Wife, I want you to act like you care. You never listen. Husband, fine, I heard you. But you need to listen too. Wife, I do that because you act like a child. When you show up late without calling, it shows you don't care. Husband, I'm thinking about you. I just had a bad day. Can we drop it and enjoy dinner? Wife, no, we can't drop it. We need to talk about this and figure out why it keeps happening. Otherwise, nothing will change.
Okay. What I'd like for you to do is type in the chat what you just experienced. In other words, what'd you see? What'd you hear? In other words, describe the video. Okay, I'm getting some good descriptions. Just give me a few more, and then I'll have enough to work with. Okay. I'm going to work through these. The first thing I want to say that the technique is about facts versus judgments and what human nature is about. Human nature, when we see a conflict, like was going on in this video, even though it was narrated, we have a tendency, and when I'm saying we, this is everybody, it's all people. It doesn't matter industry or education. People have a tendency to use judgments to describe conflicts. And that's what becomes problematic. So, for example, so if I look at some of your descriptions, when we say in the video that there was blame, is that a judgment or is that a fact? And it's a judgment.
Judgment.
Yeah, it's a judgment. Now, we could argue, we could say it's a good judgment. Or it's based, and if I were to ask you, I'd say, well, how did you know that blame was going on? What would you say to how would you answer that question? How do you know there was blame? Because why? And I'm guessing what you would have to say, because she said, and then you'd have to quote what she said. She said, you were late for the meeting, so you don't care. So that sounds like blame. Well, blame is the judgment. What she actually said, the quote, those are facts. Whereas what she said was a fact. How we frame it as a judgment. Lack of understanding. Judgment or fact? Judgment. And then once again, I do the same process. I'd say, how do you know there was a lack of understanding? And then you have to go back to what they said in order to back up your judgment. See, in other words, when people make these judgments, they also have the facts up here. It's just when we communicate, we use a judgment. But if I ask you, how do you know that? In other words, how did you know that judgment? You go back, get the facts, and then give the facts. They were defending their own needs. Defending, judgment. In other words, they were defensive. That's a judgment. How do you know they were defensive? Well, you'd have to go back and say, because they said this and they said that. So it would go back to the same way with different needs. Even if we talked about needs, I mean, that's getting close to fact, but it's probably a judgment. Possibilities, seemingly a minor issue, taking a conversation off the rails, which seems to be, that's a judgment. And I think a lot of us would argue pretty accurate judgment. But how did you know to say that? Well, you go back to the opening statement. And it went down a conflict path pretty quick. Well, the level of abstraction that we could find for them, and you're right, they didn't have one at that moment, but the level of abstraction was they do agree they want to meet and have a good lunch together. That for them, that's their superordinate goal for that day. Let me see if there's anything else. Yeah, so you were on it with your judgment is one step away from the facts. So now let me get back into talking about this. Here's the problem. When we use judgment, which is what we have a natural tendency to do, people tend not to hear the message. Instead, they focus on one of two things. They either focus on the judgment you made, or they focus on you for making it. In other words, it goes on the judgment or the messenger. So the point you're trying to make, they don't even hear it. So if you're trying to influence their behavior, your influence is zero because they don't hear your message. All they can hear is you made a judgment and now they're mad at you. So it places the attention in the wrong place. And that's where we get off track with this. Matter of fact, if you think about this, how is it possible in family conflicts that they can escalate so fast to such a high emotional level over little stuff? And so it's because of judgments. Or someone says something, you say you walk into the house, your significant other says something to you, and right away you say something back, and now they're more mad now than they were before. And so then it escalates. They say something that escalates it, and you who were not mad to start with, now you're mad. And so quickly it escalates. And why is that? Because we use judgments. And so what we have to start doing is we have to learn to state the facts. And if we state the facts, then we can get attention on the message. Now, what Tom used to say, and I really like this, that doesn't mean you're going to solve the issue. It means you have a chance to be heard and solve the issue. Because if they can't hear your message, you have no chance to resolve the situation. But if they hear your message, now you at least have a chance. So so for example, what would we do? We would describe the behavior using facts, state how it's a problem, and then describe what we want. Now we need to do some examples there. There's only two things that qualify as facts in a conflict. Quotes, you quote them, here's exactly what they said, or a sensory-based description of their behavior. In other words, you look down and your voice got louder and then you looked up. See, that would be sensory-based. Now, rather than use sensory-based language, what we tend to do, I would say something like, well, you got madder or you got angry. So I'm using the judgment. And now they're mad because I said that. Where if I said, well, your voice got louder. Well, their voice did get louder, so it's hard to argue that. And or if they said, quote, I've got some of the quotes here in a minute, we'll come up to them. Common situations, judgments at work, like, where have you been? This meeting's already started. I've heard that a lot. And in work environments, that never works because it sounds like a reprimand in front of everybody. And so the person walking in now, instead of being late, they're late and they're mad at the person who just said that. So, and not only that, everybody else heard it. They know it was said incorrectly. So the person who walked in late will spend the rest of the day going around seeing people in the group. Did you hear what Rick said to me when I walked into the meeting? So by the end of the day, everybody's mad at me before they go home. And I didn't do anything. All I did was say the person came in was late. Where have they been? But what I could have done, I could have said, let's say the meeting's, it's 11:15. Actually, I could say it's 11:46. The meeting started at 11, and we didn't know whether to start or wait on you. And so I'm stating the facts. They can hear the facts because they know what time it is. And I'm telling them how it's a problem. Why? Because we didn't know whether to start or not. I'm not doing an inquiry about their behavior. And then last of all, I want to tell them what I actually want. And what I'd like is in the future, you let me know if you're going to be late so we'll know whether we can start or not. That's it. And if I say it kind of matter of fact, they can hear it. But what's also important, and this is something else I've learned about conflict, everyone else not in the conflict who hears what I'm saying, it matters to them how I say it. So what I just said, they hear that as I'm being respectful to the person, but also holding them accountable. And so if the person tries to build a case against me, it's not working, because why? They said, well, they know I said it right. Now they may not defend it because they don't want to be in a conflict, but they're not going to join the conflict. And so it does matter. I've coached a lot of union leaders in particular, because what they want to do when someone wants to challenge them in front of the group, they want to crush them. And so what I'd get them off to the side and said, look, when you crush so-and-so, man, you did that well. They're devastated. But you said, you know what else? Everyone else is crushed because they heard what you just did. And so I give them as an alternative way to deal with it. And so I said, when you're dealing with someone you're in conflict with in front of the group, you're also managing everyone else in the group. And for a union person, it's much more to their advantage to manage the majority than one person. And they can still manage that person if they do it right. Now, I want to give you a couple of examples, and I'll make this quick because I can see I want to get my last technique in. This technique works extremely well face-to-face. It works in groups, but I also like it because it works in emails. Because you hear a lot of people, they get an email and right away they're mad and they email back, they flame the other person, and it just doesn't go over well. And so I'll tell you a situation I'm dealing with, and this is with adult learners. So because they're adult learners, I want to treat them with dignity and respect, even if they've done something wrong. And I need to hold them accountable. I still need to be respectful in how I interact with them. And some of you can probably relate to this. You've probably seen this. With the popularity of AI, because a lot of people haven't learned this yet, that generative AI, especially like Chat, GPT, and Gemini, if you type in a prompt to create references for an assignment, that's exactly what it does. It creates them, it makes them up. They're not real. They don't exist. They look real. I had a paper not too long ago. It was an annotated bibliography with 10 sources, and not a single source was real. So there wasn't a word on that paper that was real. And so now what do I say to the student? You just sent me a fabricated paper. So here's what I said to the student. I went to this technique. Fact, I said, the DOI either doesn't work or is for a different article. I said, if I do a search with the article title in Google or in the library, it doesn't show the source. I said, when I go to the journal for this year, volume, issue, and page number, this article does not appear. Then I said, send me a URL for the article and I'll regrade your paper. Or send me an explanation for how you located the source. Well, that's when I get the emails. Finally, they come back in. They say, well, I use Chat GPT. So now what that gives me is a teachable moment. So I'm going to assume right now they don't know how AI works. So I can explain to them how AI works and that you can't put a prompt in to create a source because that's what it does. It makes it up. And if you do get a source from AI, you have to verify it. And so then once I do that, that usually fixes it. You know, we're dealing with adults here. I don't get any more fabricated sources from them. I'm going to skip my mediation example because I don't think I'm going to have time to get through it. So, but I want to add this technique in and I'll be quick on it. In emotional intelligence, a technique that they teach is in the brain, the amygdala is our emotional center. And when someone pushes your emotional buttons, it's the amygdala that responds first. And it's the emotional center. So what you're going to get an emotional response literally without thinking. Literally without thinking. And that's what escalates these family conflicts so quickly. It's because we allow the amygdala to respond, and the amygdala is going to get you in trouble. So what they've learned is there's 6 seconds difference between rational thinking and the amygdala. Rational thinking kicks in 6 seconds after the amygdala. So what this means is don't get in a hurry to respond. If it's an email, wait before you respond. Why? Because if you wait, rational thinking will kick in, and however you respond will be much better. But not only that, you can use a technique then, because rational thinking will say, hey, Rick, use facts, and then I'll sit down and respond in a rational way. Now, if I'm live, and here's where the breathing technique comes in, because it's natural, it's normal. Someone pushes my emotional buttons, all I have to do, breathe in to at least 3 and out to 3. And sometimes I count too fast when I'm emotionally charged, so I'd like to breathe in to 4, breathe out to 4, then respond. Why? Because now I'm going to get a rational response and not an emotional response. So this breathing technique is natural. Matter of fact, if you watch athletes on TV, almost any sport, watch them. Anytime they're in a down moment, watch them do the breathing. Baseball is great because the batters they'll step out of the batter's box, they'll do the breathing technique, step back in. So what they're doing, they're refocusing before the next pitch comes, and it's effective. And let's say they were caught off guard by a pitch. That triggers their emotional response. They step out, get the rational brain back in. Now they've got their instincts going. They're ready to play again. My son, who coaches hockey, he uses this with his hockey players, and it keeps them focused. And it's non-threatening, it's fast, it's simple. So I wanted you to see that. The last one, then I'm going to let Teo close this out. It's called reframing. And what's important about reframing is people, when they talk about conflict, they will use judgment when they talk about it. And what we need to do, if we're there to help, is reframe what they say to neutral words. And if we reframe it to neutral words, then the other person in conflict can hear it. Not only that, they can hear that we are not buying the judgment, that we can state it neutral. I once had a mediator told me that he had a disputant. He asked him, why are we here? And the disputant said, we're here because that guy's lying over there. Now, that's a pretty strong judgment. Those are almost fighting words for a judgment. And the mediator just calmly looked at him and says, so we're here because you're concerned about the quality of information you're receiving. And the guy goes, you're right. And then he starts carrying on. Meanwhile, the mediator can see the guy who's being accused. He's able to calm down because he just heard what the mediator said. Mediator wasn't buying the judgment. And so it was highly effective. And I did have one more on here, but it's deletions and exaggerations, which people do. They did it all the way through this video. Here's some of the words they said. And what's important here is to recover it. She, like wife said, that has nothing to do with this. What was she referring to? because that could be more than one thing. Or nothing to do with this, what is she referring to? So you have to ask. When you say that has nothing to do with this, what are you talking about? Or the husband wife said, we need to talk about this and figure out why it keeps happening. Otherwise, and then the husband, you always find fault or exaggeration. You always blame something else. So what I would challenge an exaggeration with, was there ever a time that you didn't? Because there always is. Okay, and sorry, Teo, we got started late here. I'll let you close out.
I appreciate it. I think there were a lot of nuggets, some that I was familiar with because I've had the privilege of having you share some of these things. The opening the box breathing or 16-second breath, I have literally used that in just about every classroom or Zoom meeting or boardroom that I've ever been in. So I appreciate even just that reminder, because it helps me settle my nerves and get into a space where I could, I think, be a better facilitator. So yeah, thank you for these resources. I'm assuming that we can share your slide deck, or I'm hoping that we can share your slide deck with participants.
Yes.
And maybe even link it to in sort of the session notes, the show notes for the video when this goes live. So I just appreciate your time on this Thursday morning. Could I invite everyone, since we're not a huge group, do you have one or two words of thanks or a phrase or a reflection, not 4 sentences, but like maybe 4 words that you want to share with Rick? Feel free to unmute yourself and just share that.
It's just, what do I want to say? Very, you can use it, right? It's not theory. It's tactical, and I can go do that. And I just put in the chat that I have an employee that I really need this with right now. So
cool. Well, this really mirrors John Wallen's interpersonal gap model. I don't know if you've heard of that, Rick, but so I just added that to the chat. It could be downloaded, but separating facts from judgments, calming techniques.
I see it in the chat. Thank you. Good one.
Anyway, it sounds like you've got a very effective approach.
Thank you.
All right, everybody.
Agreed.
Oh, go ahead,
Thank
Jennifer.
you. I was going to say it was very grounding, and I think that the powerful reminder to pause and even acknowledge our role in the conflict and how we can show up at our best. So thank you. Always grateful for the time with you, Rick, and the resources and reminders that you share. So thank you. Needed to hear it this week.
Thank you.
Everyone have a fabulous rest of your Thursday and enjoy the rest of this holiday.
Teo, do I need to send you the PowerPoint?
If you could, that'd be great.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thanks, Lisa.